Yes, ma'am, keep going.
Well, I want to mention, about their immigrant ancestors. But we was the one, I wonder where he got his people down an immigrant family of 15 children, 2 mothers, and the mother of the 3 children. I don't think that many would know, but I have heard that he never proved. But anyway, but Luke had no chance to find out. He had no way of knowing that his family outlined for us that we were so glad to know about was the people, but not the first family, but the second family. The first family that lived on that farm, the first generation. He had the same children and some of the same names, and the father was the same name, Christian Yoder. So he would be the one that would be like the priest. We in Pennsylvania doesn't like a citizen getter, their guy. So we also really appreciate what Reuben Yoder did for us. Not glad to help bring us in. But he has done for us is really appreciated. Before I start off, Chris, I have something to tell you. And that is, I know that I was at Luke there. Say thank you to you too. Not only for your absence, but you have taken together all this information, Yoder information, organized it, that is the migration of the different Yoder communities that have come, when they said, and I have, I'm going to organize the information, coded it, he has informed us, he has inspired us. Now, like now, you've got a group together to get reacquainted. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it all. We know you have the tools and the techniques and the skills to lead into the future. We appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel.
I think that to you, to the whole group, I think, bless you all, everyone, bless you.
Thank you. I think we're cut off, but I think they are. And, well, if you can hear me over the speaker, you're welcome to hold on to the phone and you can listen to my spiel. But thank you again, Rachel. Bye-bye. We're all here today because we're part of a family of an Amish Mennonite couple named Harriet and Reuben Yoder, and they were married over 162 years ago. I've identified over 1,478 descendants in the Reuben book, and I'm sure there are maybe hundreds more descendants that I didn't track down. There are babies in the family today that are 7 generations removed from Reuben and Harriet. For these children, Reuben and Harriet are just one of 64 sets of 5 great-grandparents. And if you go further back, Reuben's immigrant Yoder ancestors is just one of 2,048 9 great-grandparents for these children. We don't have photographs of Reuben or Harriet, but we do have some pieces of their story. And tonight I'll show some pictures and talk about them in our common ancestry. I hope that when I finish, you'll agree with me that they have left us all with a heritage which is well worth remembering and celebrating. This year we're commemorating the centennial of a family reunion held at Lake Shipshewana in 1930, the summer after Reuben died. I have 110 charts, and I promise you I won't spend more than 10 minutes on each one. And you'll be out sometime before 2 in the morning. But here's the earliest family photo that I found. It's a picture of the Yoder boys. And from the age of Uncle Levi in the middle, I assumed it was in the 1800s, but thanks to Ernie Miller. Ernie, will you raise your hand? And he has the family albums of Elizabeth Yoder Miller and Alan Miller. And on the back of his copy of this photo, it gives the date. It says February 13, 1886. And here's the earliest photo of all 8 children, the 6 sons and 2 daughters of Reuben and Harriet Reel, taken about 1900. And you'll notice that Uncle Levi has plenty of hair in this picture. Thanks to Rachel Wenger for touching up and providing this enhanced version of the photo. It's a better version than what I have in the book. In the back row, we have Minnow, Daniel, Moses, and Samuel. And in the front, Elizabeth Yoder Miller, Levi, Mary Yoder Powell, and Peter. All of their children are gone now, but I believe we have over a dozen of their grandchildren with us. And if you are a grandchild of one of these people, will you please raise your hand?
You can't stand up.
That's great. Thank you. This photo is of an early family reunion. Copies of it have been found in several branches of the family, but thanks again to Ernie Miller, we have one copy that has a date on it. And that date is September 1st, 1904. You can see Uncle Levi's hair is starting to recede. And here's what the whole family looked like at that time. And here's what we looked like 100 years ago in 1913. Less than 3 months ago, we lost the last survivor of that 1913 reunion when Vera Yoder Bickel, who was the granddaughter of Benny Yoder by his son Owen, passed away in April at the age of 102. In July of 1918, the family gathered at Brother Samuel Yoder's farm east of Shipshewana. And on June 20th, 1925, we were back at Shipshewana Lake. And you look at this young fella who is shading his eyes. Where is it? Yeah. Where? Right there. Who do you think that is? It's J.O. and Yoder. J.O., could you raise your hand? And then I think his sister Arlene was next to him. And I think Doris is in there someplace. And Glenna is in the front row also. Glenna Kimby, could you raise your hand? And Doris, could you raise your hand? And Arlene, could you raise your hand? And was there anybody else in the audience here who was there in 1925 who I haven't spotted yet? I guess not.
I don't think you miss anybody.
In 1983, we had a 70th anniversary of the 1913 reunion as a potluck at the Brethren Retreat Center, and I published the first Reuben Yoder book. Many of the 1913 attendees were there at that time, including my father, Otto Yoder, and my uncle Raymond Yoder. And many of the grandchildren of Reuben were still living and had memories of it. We have about 115 people in this photo, and I'm wondering how many of you were in the audience in 1983? A fair number of you. Great. Reuben's family, here is the family tree for Reuben and Harriet. Now what I'm going to do is to step backward tonight. I'm going to step over his father and his grandfather, who were both Amish bishops, and over his great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather, who were both on a ship that arrived in Philadelphia in 1742, and both had been born in the Old Country. I'll talk about the origins of the Yoders in the Old Country, the main branches of the family that came to America, and specifically about our Amish branch, and what we know about it. And then I'll come down the line a generation at a time to today and to the Reuben family. In Europe, the use of last names did not begin until around the 12th century. And some surnames came out of people's given names, like John's son. Others came out of occupations like carpenter or Zimmerman in German, bodily attributes or geography names. But historians believe that our family name came from St. Theodore, abbreviated J-O-D-E-R, a missionary monk who crossed the Alps from Italy, bringing Christianity to Switzerland in the 4th century A.D. St. Yoder came to be honored in Switzerland, and a number of legends have grown up around him. Chapels and churches are named in his honor. And Luxembourg put out a stamp, you see in the middle here, honoring the 1,500th anniversary of his investiture into sainthood. And the Swiss church calendar and American Yoders celebrate St. Yoder's Day each year on August 16th. The name comes from the Greek theos, meaning God, and doron, meaning gift. So literally God's gift. So I hope all of you that are married to a Yoder appreciate your gift. The Swiss Encyclopedia places our ancient family in the German-speaking town of Steffisburg in Canton, Bern, Switzerland. And here you can see a picture of the town in the old church. And on a map, you can see where it's located, right above the town of Thun and south of the city of Bern. Steffisburg has its own town crest, and you see that in the middle here. The old church still stands. It was built in 1681 when our family still lived there. And inside the church, around a painting of Moses, are a variety of family crests of different important people in the village, including 2 crests for Yoders. And here's one of them. Well, let me go back a minute. This earliest part of the church here was built in the year 1000. So the church is over 1,000 years old today. German family researcher Carl Yoder, J-O-D-E-R, dug through various records and traced back the Steffisburg family of Yoders as far as a Peter Yoder, who he says was born in 1260 at Yoderhubel, or Yoder's Hill. And then he tracks the family down to those in Steffisburg. Now, I label this an apocryphal lineage because some of these are guesses between generations. And when you have a church record that gives the name of a Peter Yoder, and 26 years later, there's a Peter Yoder getting married, sometimes the assumption was, well, that's the same person. The Daughters of the American Revolution might not accept that. But in all likelihood, a good share of the people in this list are ancestors of those of us in this room. There's one particular Steffisburg family that we can identify as the keys to the Yoders in America today. And those are two sons of Casper Yoder and Margaret Penning, whose marriage record in the church archives is shown right here. They were married in 1596. Their youngest sons were Yost, born in 1607, and Nicholas, born in 1609. And these fellows have been shown to be the ancestors of most of the American Yoders, in fact, all of them whose lineage we can trace at this time. And here are the families of Yost and Nicholas, their children and who they married. You notice they both were married on the same date to ladies with the same name. Now, these ladies were not the same lady. They were cousins who were both called Anna and Proxil. And they were married in 1642. Now, the Swiss Anabaptists grew out of the Reformation and out of the Peasant Wars in the 1520s. Our family was in the middle of these controversies. The Anabaptist Yoders, who were to be associated with Jacob and became Amish, came out of the family of the Yost Yoder I showed you on the previous chart, the one that was born in 1607. Yost himself was the chairman of the Steffisburg Parish Court, which supervised morals and church and school attendance records. The parish record wrote of him that he was honorable, careful, wise, and a modest man. Now, an Anabaptist preacher named Ulrich Mueller was active in the Steffisburg area and was imprisoned in 1674 for his preaching. When he was released, he started over again. In 1679, Yost's son Christian, then living in the town of Thun, about a mile south of Steffisburg, was fined 50 kroner for letting Mueller preach on his property. In 1690, Yost Yoder and Hans Kaufmann formally asked to be relieved of their parish court responsibilities because they had Anabaptist children. But their offer was not accepted. They continued in those roles. The same year, Yost's son Casper was identified as having hosted a meeting in his home featuring no less a man than Jacob Amish, the future founder of the Amish. Later in 1690, Yost's son Yost Jr. and son-in-law Christian Blank were reported as having immigrated from Steffisburg. And then in 1692, the 85-year-old Yost Yoder, along with the other two members of the church court, was taken down the river to Bern as a hostage. They were lodged in the most expensive inn in town at their own expense, with the expectation that the financial pressures would cause them to give up the names of the Anabaptists in their midst. They stayed silent, and after 6 months, they were released. In 1695, the records show that Yost's son Christian and son-in-law Hans Rupp also immigrated from Steffisburg. Yost's son-in-law Christian Blank was with Amon at the meeting with fellow Anabaptist leaders in which the big schism between them took place that led to the formation of the Amish. And Blank also is distinguished by having been the first person to ever use the term Amish to describe the followers of Jacob Amon. And he used this in a letter that he wrote in the early 1700s. At some point, the words in the church record which described how honorable and wise the senior Yost was were crossed out in pen. And most, if not all, of his children had moved away by the end of 1695. Historian Robert Becker calls Steffisburg and St. Marie-aux-Mines in Alsace the twin cradles of the Amish. In the 1690s, over 40 families from Steffisburg immigrated to Alsace and that community. Ulrich Yoder, who you remember spoke at Christian Yoder's house and resulted in a fine for him, had already been living there. And soon Jacob Amen and his brother Ulrich Amen and others, including Jost's sons Christian, Jost, Peter, and living not far away, Casper, came there as well. In the early 1700s, Yoders moved to other spots in Alsace and the German Palatinate, which borders on Alsace, and these became transit points for the trip to America, but some Yoders live there yet today. This chart gives a summary of the Yoder branches coming to America. The first Yoders to America were from the descendants of Nicholas, brother of our Jost. And they were Hans and Jost Yoder, who settled in the Ole Valley of Berks County around 1710. A Mennonite, Hans Yoder, settled in Bucks County, Pennsylvania by 1720. And then a nephew of the Ole folks, Conrad, came first to Pennsylvania and then by the 1760s went to North Carolina, where he founded the southern branch of the Yoder family. And then later on, around 1764, Conrad's cousin Melchior was naturalized and his family remained in Pennsylvania. I call this chart my Rose by Any Other Name chart, because all of these names, oh wait a minute, let me go back. Let's get the most important one. Our Amish folks came in 1742. Our ancestor, and on the same boat, the children of his brother who died at sea, and whose name we don't know, but whose wife is referred to as Widow Barbara. And in Amish genealogy, they are given the code of YR2 and YR1. There were other Yoders of the Amish line who came before 1800 and then into the 1800s, and also Yoders who are proven descendants of Casper, son of Jost, who came initially to Somerset County, where our family then lived, and another line that came into Illinois and spells their name today I-O-D-E-R, Yoder. Now I Rose by Any Other Name chart. All of these names, all of these spellings are the outgrowth of the J-O-D-E-R spelling in Switzerland. Y-O-D-E-R, Y-O-D-E-R-S, Y-O-T-H-E-R, Y-O-T-H-E-R-S, Y-O-U-T-H-E-R, Y-O-T-E-R, J-O-T-T-E-R, J-O-D-E-R, I-O-D-E-R, and even some Yetters, Y-U-T-T-E-R-E-R-S. Although not all members of that family are descended from the Switzerland Yoders. There's another batch who have that spelling that came from the Stuttgart area in Germany. This map shows proportionally how the Yoders lived, or where the Yoders lived, and over 50% of us live in the states of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana. And as of the 1990 census, Yoder was the 1,118th most common surname. By the year 2000, we had grown to the 707th most common surname, with about 44,000 members. And we can thank some of you all for the hard work. The first of our Yoders in America were the families of our ancestor Christian Yoder and his brother, who reportedly died at sea. And here are their signatures on the ship register of Christian and his two oldest nephews, who are old enough to be called upon to sign the ship's registry. They arrived on the ship Francis and Elizabeth in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, September 21st, 1742. The Amish historian Leroy Beachy believes it likely that our ancestor's signature is the third of these, because he has compared them with signatures in old religious books still in existence in the Amish community. The ship was commanded by Captain George North, and it started in Rotterdam, Netherlands, and came to the U.S. by way of Deal, England. I lost it. We may have to wait a minute, and I'll have to call on Tim or Mark to... I'll bring it back. Okay, let's go. Right, well, we're back where we started. Good. The pictures that you see here and here, this is what Rotterdam looked like around the mid-1700s, and this is what Philadelphia looked like about the same time when our ancestors came through. This fortress in Deal is there today, but it was also there at the time that our ship stopped on the way to America. So our ancestors would have seen that building. Now, we don't know who the father was of Christian the immigrant, but everything points to the family of Joseph in Steffisburg as being his grandfather. All the facts that tie that family to the Amish, but is further supported by DNA results. The Yoder Newsletter has tested over 90 Yoders across the country in different branches of the family. The Y chromosome can be measured, and markers on it can be measured like a fingerprint, and changes very little from father to son, from son to grandson, and so forth over dozens of generations. One important thing we've seen in all of the Yoders of the Amish line are that they share with our 1742 immigrants a particular marker value. These are the marker names. These are the values measured for that marker. The Amish have a 16. All other the Yoders have a 15 at that marker. Our Yoders from 1742 and from our line have the 16. The Yoders that we can prove were descended from Casper, son of Yost, also have the 16. We know enough about Casper's descendants to know that he had a son Christian and a grandson Christian, both of whom stayed in Germany. So he could not have been the father of our ancestor. That DNA mutation must have been a generation prior with Yost himself. So our ancestor must be one of these other sons of Yost Yoder. Now we don't know which ones, but there's a number of speculations. This Jacob who married Verena Kaufman, a cousin, a nephew of this lady, settled on adjacent property in Berks County. It would be nice to think we have yet another Christian in our line, and that Christian signature we saw on that page that showed St. Maria Min was a very educated signature, and obviously our family is very educated, and that would fit. But there's several other possibilities that have been speculated, and on the internet you go out and you'll see a whole bunch of people claiming one or the other. There's no proof. We don't know yet. We know who we can rule out, but we don't know who we can rule in. But it's almost assured that the grandfather of our immigrant Christian was Yost, born 1607. Here's the family tree again, and I'll walk down the Yoder line to Reuben and his father and his family, beginning with Christian the immigrant, right here. Christian Yoder, the immigrant, settled in Berks County on the border of Upper Bern and Center Township, right there. And he is south of Charlottesville, and properties owned by the widow Barbara's family up in here. And another ancestor of ours, who was Bishop Jacob Hertzler, and east and south of Jacob Hochstetler, who some of you may have heard of, and I'll talk about a little later, who was also an ancestor of ours. The immigrant Christian Yoder was born about 1700, and in 1751 he took a warrant for land which he patented under the name of Contentment. And then he took adjacent pieces of land in 1755. The main house is now owned by Larry M. Popes of Mooresville, Pennsylvania, and when I first visited in the 1980s, the owner had some interior wall boards down, and you could see the original log construction underneath. It could well be the original building. It's in a logical place on the property, down at the bottom of the hill, not far from the stream. Here's another view from the back. You can see there's a road that runs in front of the house, and the stream is at the bottom of the hill. Another view of the front. Some views of the outside buildings. The Yoder cow. And here you see the original ancient basketball hoop. North of this area, the North Hill Amish settlement was established in 1740, and our family is a part of that. It's the first identifiable Amish community in the New World. The group was strengthened in 1749 when Bishop Jacob Hertzler settled in North Hill, and the settlement grew to nearly 200 families at its height. Here you see a home later built on the Hertzler property. And through the woods here you can see where there's a cemetery that's in the back part of this property. It does not have any identifiable individually marked stones, but there is a plaque that relates to the cemetery as a whole. The second Christian, and Rachel alluded to him, was called Schweitzer Christian, or Schweitz Christian. Reuben wrote that he was born in Switzerland, which would account for the nickname. In 1760, he was deeded that middle piece of property, the one with the house that I just showed you, by his father. Starting in 1769, the Penns opened up the Westlands for settlement, and in 1773, Schweitzer Christian registered for 2 parcels of 606 acres in what is now Somerset County, Pennsylvania. He sold his land in Berks County in 1775 for 600 pounds English money, and then he completed the purchase of 606 acres in Berks County, or Somerset County, later that year for the equivalent of $968. Christian Yoder, the immigrant, is believed to have died in November of 1775, and Schweitzer Christian moved west the next spring. By leaving Berks when he did, he avoided the fate of many other members of the North Hill congregation, like his neighbor to the north, Christian Zook. Zook and others were put in jail at Reading for refusing to bear arms during the Revolution. Here's the homestead in Somerset County, as pictured about 1906. There were no roads to the new home site, and the nearest neighbor was said to be 5 miles away. In a small clearing on the property, he and his older children built a log house and a barn. Schweitzer Christian was the founder of the Blades Congregation of Amish in Stony Creek Township. And here's a map showing his original 2 plots, nicknamed Yoder's Fancy and Middleton. And here you can see how his sons built up their farm around their father's property. Bishop Christian Sr. was the oldest son of Schweitzer Christian by his first wife. He was born in October 1758, and he married Magdalena Troyer, and they had 14 children. He was selected as bishop for the Glades sometime between 1783 and 1788. In 1785, he was granted a warrant for 150 acres of land to the southeast of his father's property. His property, called Yodersburg, here's a plot map that shows that piece. Today, if you go to the Somerset County Historical Society, you can see this loom, and carved into the headboard of the loom are the names John Miller, the date of January 1777, and Christian Yoder. Likely Bishop Christian Yoder Sr. as a young man. Bishop Christian Sr. was a major church leader, participating in various minister meetings and signing two major church disciplines or ordinances of 1809 and 1837. He was also the scribe who wrote down those documents. He passed away in 1838 at the age of 79 years, and his son Christian was his executor. The old Yoder Cemetery is now on land that was part of the Schweitzer Christian homestead. It's in the middle of the Zubik Strip Mining Company, north of Brotherton, Pennsylvania. It's up in the middle of that area. The few marked stones there are for his son John and his son's wife, who purchased the homestead property from his father. Here's a photo of our son Christian at the cemetery taken in 1998. Tom Yoder of the Menno family led the efforts to place a marker and some cleanup of the grounds. And some in this room donated to this effort, and here's the stone which resulted from that. It was placed in 1999. The next generation was Bishop Christian Jr. He was born in the Glades in 1790. He married Elizabeth Miller, who bore him 3 children before she died. Then he married Catherine Miller, by whom he had 9 more children, including our ancestor Reuben. His home was located to the east of the properties of his father and grandfather. He had got 52 acres in 1812, an additional 176 acres in 1826. Reuben's oldest sister, Elizabeth Beachy, wrote in 1910, "Our folks lived on a wild timber farm in Somerset County. My folks went by the name Brown, Acorn Christian, or by some people Log Christian, because that was mostly what our farm was, logs and timber. This is where all the family was born and grew up till the old folks died and were buried on the farm. Then all the family went further west." Here is the house that Reuben was born in. This photo was likely taken by Uncle Pete and Aunt Amelia Yoder around 1910. And written on the back is the words, "The house where a father was born," that establishes this house had been built before 1831 when Reuben was born. And here's the same house in 2007. I'm going to take you on a tour of this house. The outside from the west and from the east. The first floor, the living area and the kitchen, and then another side view. The second floor and the large bedroom areas, and then on the right, the stairs to the attic and the attic area. Imagine, if you will, a family of 3 boys and 8 girls filling up this house. In the basement, you can see where there's an extended footprint that indicates that sometime the house was expanded to the south. Here's a picture of the barn taken by, I believe, Lester Yoder in 1936. And the barn and outbuildings in 2007. On one of the beams in the upper barn can be found carved the name D.R. Yoder. Now, when I visited there in 2007, the owner wondered who that D.R. Yoder was. Would the descendants of D.R. Yoder at the back table please raise their hand? Daniel Yoder? We have 3 Daniel Yoder descendants, and we're so glad you're here. But apparently, Uncle Dan, Reuben's third child, had gone back and visited at some point, and he carved his name. Here are the past and present owners of the farm. First from the left is Leroy Beachy, who was of Berlin, Pennsylvania, who was the current owner. Before him, the Yonai family lived there, and this is Joan Yonai and her husband, Joan Yonai Wallace, and her husband John. And she grew up there. The historic property records for the family were given by Jane Yonai to Tom Yoder, and he passed them on to the archives of the Mennonite Church in Goshen, where they are today. Across the field to the northeast, you can see the Stony Creek and a bridge across the creek, and that's the creek from which the township gets its name. Here's a well that's on the property, a little to the east of the house. It was hand dug by Yoders, by our Christian and his family. And Joan Yonai remembers how sweet the water from that well always tasted. In 1838, Christian Jr. succeeded his father as Bishop of Clays. He lived only a few years and died in 1846, and his widow then died in 1849. And both are buried in the cemetery on the old home place. This map by Tom Yoder of Carapolis, Pennsylvania, showed how to find the cemetery and the homestead. And here's a close-up view that shows the relative position of the cemetery, the house, and the barn. Up the road just a little bit from the house is the cemetery. Here's a close-up of, here's a view of the cemetery about 1910. There were no mark stones, but there were field stones. Tom Yoder of the Mennel family led an effort to restore this cemetery as well as he had the old. And initially, they set up the stone marker. My daughter Hayden and my son Christian helped me plant this about the time the marker was put in. And then later, with the help of the Mennel family and others, they raised money to put up a stone wall around the cemetery. And this is the way it looked at that time. And here's a more recent photo of the stone that was placed there. Here at the bottom is Reuben's mother's signature, Catherine Yoder. Her father was Abraham Miller, and he was an Amish minister who was born in later years. He lived with the family from at least the early 1840s onward, in the last decade of his life. Catherine's mother was a granddaughter of Jacob Hochstetter. About his family, a major book was written in 1912. You can also see Bishop Jacob Hertzler in our family tree. The Jacob Hochstetler family was the victim of a well-known Indian attack in September of 1757. Keeping to his pacifist belief, Jacob refused to let his sons use their weapons against the Indians. They were eventually smoked out of their house, where the mother, daughter, and one son was killed. Jacob and two other sons were taken away by the Indians and held captive for many years. Our ancestor, his son John, was away from home and was not subject to that attack. But Reuben knew this story from the family and wrote about it in his history. And in the Reuben book is an expanded version that was copied from the Hochstetler book as an appendix. Reuben Yoder was born January 9, 1831. He was 15 years old when his father died and 18 when his mother died. Older brother David came to own the home farm. Their father's cousin Benedict Yoder, whose photo appears here, was appointed the formal guardian to the younger children, including Reuben. Reuben married Harriet Reel in 1851. And Harriet was born March 3rd, 1830, to John Reel and Elizabeth Balser, who were immigrants from Germany. She was baptized in the Lutheran Church of Berlin, as pictured here, and still stands today, in 1831. Her obituary says she was reunited with the Amish Mennonite Church in 1848 and remained faithful until her death. She and Reuben must have already been courting before this time for her to have made this choice. They were married April 1st, 1851, by Bishop Abner Yoder, successor to his father. My friend Rachel Kreider, just as you heard, celebrated her 104th birthday, and she spoke at our 1983 reunion. She says that Reuben must have been a very exceptional young man for a young Lutheran girl to give up her religion for him. I'd like to thank Sandy Kelly in California of the Daniel Yoder line for these pictures. We have a photo of the Schrock residence where Mother was raised. So this is not a very good picture, but that was a place that Harriet Reel's family lived in Pennsylvania. And also a picture of the family of George Reel, who stayed in Berlin, Pennsylvania, and his family. And George was the brother of Harriet. These are the original stones of Harriet's parents at the Oddfellow Cemetery in Berlin, Pennsylvania, taken about the same time as the farmhouse picture and Reuben's farmhouse and the stones at the Yoder farm. And here are the new ones that were in existence in 1998. In 1841, a caravan of 4 families, including Reuben's oldest sister, Barbara, married to Joseph Bontrager, became the first Amish to move to Elkhart County, Indiana. Brother Christian and sister Lydia followed in 1843. 20 days after their marriage, Reuben and Harriet packed up their ox cart and headed west to Indiana. Mose Yoder's daughter Edith, pictured here, told me a story she heard while teaching school in Iowa. An elderly man named Eli Navy related how Reuben and Harriet were held up at his parents' house in Ohio with a sick horse, and his parents traded them a healthy one so the bride and groom could continue their journey. They arrived in LaGrange County on May 8, 1851, a journey of 400 miles. On September 23, 1851, Reuben bought 80 acres in Newberry Township for $560. 22 years later, he bought an additional 80 acres for $2,200. Reuben described this land as timberland and told how he moved on it, quote, cleared up a farm and are living on the same farm ever since. This farm is located about 3.5 miles south of Shipshewana, and the farmhouse was located toward the center of the property with a north-south lane exiting at either end. And I'd like to thank and recognize Glenn Mast and his wife, who are with us tonight, for hosting us earlier in the day and sharing with us their farm they own. His great-grandfather bought the farm from Reuben in 1908. Thank you, Glenn. Here's a picture of the old farmhouse, the main home. And at some point after the old folks got into their senior years, a dowdy house was built for the old folks to move into, which was quieter than having all the kids underfoot that were starting to be born and raised into the other house. On the front porch here, you can see a number of people. There are Elizabeth and Alan Miller. There's Uncle Levi and Aunt Wilma. There's Daniel and his wife and the two boys, Toby and Leroy, Perry and Leroy, and Uncle Pete and Aunt Amelia are on the porch too. Here's a view of the farm. The barn, much of the old barn stands today. Some of you saw the old beam and cut that must have come off the farm as they cleared all those trees away. And the windmill looks here to be wood. It's now metal, but seems to be about the same place as the earlier one. Here's a view of the farm from the east. And here's an aerial view taken a number of years ago by Glenn's family. You can